And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your miserable, rainy, gloomy, chilly Monday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Now, normally, on a normal, everyday, average day, maybe you'll have one big-time movie star or some famous person in the film business or in the sports world or music or something along those lines. But every once in a while, you have more than one, because there are a lot of days where, you go into whose birthday is it today, and it'll say something like, Birdman. And I don't mean Larry Bird, but Birdman, the rapper, like that'll be the biggest name from that day. But today, April 7th, is Russell Crowe's birthday. I think Russell turns 61 today. Either 60 or 61 today. But he is not the most significant birthday of today. Francis Ford Coppola was born April 7, 1939. That puts him at 86 years of age. And when we think of the legendary names in cinema, Coppola's on the list. You can decide for yourself, where does he rank in terms of greatest writer-directors, forget even the writing, greatest filmmakers who ever lived. I don't know. There are a lot of Coppola films that I'm really not a fan of, but his place in history is secured on the strength of his quite stupendous writing. That's kind of the thing with Quentin Tarantino. If Tarantino had just been an ordinary filmmaker, if he hadn't been, a Spielberg, Scorsese level talent, or Coppola if you want to put him in there, although they don't make films anywhere near alike, despite graphic violence sometimes that you don't expect. But if Tarantino had just been an ordinary director, he would be a major historical figure because of how many incredible screenplays he's written. And you can look at Coppola in a similar vein. And the thing is, it's a concept that I always come back to, but it's important to note that even someone who is now old, or in the case of Coppola, would be considered very old, it doesn't mean that they're old fogies or that they're stodgy or that they were not once brilliant, cutting edge, groundbreaking. Francis Coppola, as a writer, similar to Terrence Malick, who doesn't have the extensive filmography of Scorsese, Spielberg, Kubrick, Lucas, Coppola, but Terrence Malick was a guy who, because he was such an incredible writer, that was his in to the business. Malick wrote a couple of big screenplays before he had the opportunity to make Badlands, his first major film, with Martin Sheen and a very young Martin Sheen, a very even younger Sissy Spacek in 1973. In the case of Francis Coppola, a little bit of trivia that only people like me happen to know offhand because somebody told me this once before the internet. Francis Coppola was credited on the screenplay for Franklin Schaffner's iconic war film, which is more of a character study if we're being fair, Patton, the one with George C. Scott where he won the Oscar and then didn't want to go, and there's always controversy. That's what's great about the Oscars. There's controversy in 2025 because, and you can give me 15 reasons. There was controversy in 1960 whatever because there was reasons. And then Jane Fonda at those Oscars. And then George C. Scott not wanting to be involved. And Brando protesting. There's always something with the Oscars. But Francis Coppola started as a writer. He went to, I didn't know this, I'm embarrassed to say, this is something that I should have known 20 years ago. He did his undergrad work at Hofstra. The guy was from Michigan. So I wonder what the story is, how he ended up doing his undergrad at Hofstra. He must have temporarily moved to Long Island. Somehow this just escaped me. But he went to UCLA for graduate film. And it is also important to note that the other big hitters, Lucas went to USC. Martin Scorsese went to New York University, where I also went however many years later. And I wish that I had been there when he taught, but alas, I was not there yet when Martin did an advanced seminar. It was in the spring of 93. I didn't land at New York University until the fall of 94. I can't even imagine what an impossible experience it would have been to have him as a professor. But from everything I heard and learned back then, the guy was fucking great. They said he was your favorite professor, and not just because it was Martin Scorsese, because he was just as gregarious as you would imagine. But where I was going with that is that Coppola went to UCLA for graduate film. Lucas had gone to USC as an undergrad. Scorsese did his undergrad at NYU, and Steven Spielberg kind of fucked around at, I think, UCLA, but he didn't graduate. So Lucas was, from an academic perspective, he was beyond those other guys. And De Palma might have done graduate work. I'm not sure about that. That's their other friend, but he's not as exalted a filmmaker, of course, as the others. But the key moment for Lucas, he was a kid. He was 22 years old, going on 23, and he won a major screenwriting award at UCLA. And that's what jump-started his career. Everybody has, every great journey begins with a first step. Quentin Tarantino being able to get Reservoir Dogs to Harvey Keitel when he was just a crazy lunatic genius, brilliant, seemingly photographic memory when it came to movies. He was just a kid working in a video store. In the case of Coppola, selling that script, winning that, it was the Samuel Goldwyn Award, I think it was called, opened doors. And he didn't randomly get hired 6-7 years later to write the screenplay for Patton. And he used that to springboard into, he did a movie, The Rain People, with the very young James Cass. It's not really that good. Another, one of his sort of misses early in his career. But he was able to get The Godfather together. He was very young. He was in his early 30s. And you have the big studio, and you have massive monster producer like a Robert Evans and all of these major players involved. And look, there's always a thing when you have somebody where the sense, especially if it's an older actor or producer or director of photography, like the story where Kubrick had to basically bawl out the DP who didn't think he knew what he was doing on the set of The Killing. He says, this fucking kid, he doesn't know which end is up. He's giving me all this frame rate shit. I don't think he understands it. Bro, he understands it more than you. What are you, stupid? Yeah. That guy seemed really stupid. But in the case of Coppola, as young as he was when he began work on The Godfather, there aren't any reports of problems on the set or even Brando saying, I don't think this kid knows what. No, there is nothing like that. So Coppola, a little bit idiosyncratic, maybe a little bit eccentric of manner. But the sense that I've always gotten is that he commanded respect because people just thought they were in the presence of greatness. And this is something that Kubrick experienced when he worked on Paths of Glory with Kirk Douglas. And Kirk Douglas, to his last, always talked of Kubrick in the highest possible way. That he was the real deal. He really was that great. He really was that much of a visionary. And it seems that everyone on The Godfather bought into what Coppola was doing. And then he did The Conversation, also wrote and directed, with Gene Hackman, Alan Garfield, really a great cast, Terry Garr in a small role. The Extraordinary, speaking of Coppola, John Cazale, who he worked with, what was the thing with Cazale? Every movie he was in was nominated for, by percentage, it's ridiculous stat, but by percentage, Cazale is the answer to as ridiculous, obscure trivia question as you can imagine. What actor's entire filmography, if you look at the average Oscar nominations, he's the answer to the question. Every movie he was in was a home run. From Deer Hunter, Godfather, Conversation, Dog Day Afternoon on down. Attica! Although that was Big Al screaming, Attica! Attica! First time Pacino screaming and yelling in a movie all the way back in 75. But it's one thing to just produce great work. And most people will never get to do anything in the movie business, let alone make touchstone type landmark motion pictures such as The Godfather. But you can make the argument that from a cultural significant standpoint, not so much pop culture, but in terms of a movie being plugged into the time period and really capturing the essence of the time, The Conversation is one of the greatest films ever made. And if somebody tells me they think that that's actually Coppola's masterpiece, not Godfather, or as a lot of people like to say, not Godfather 2, because Godfather 2, generally speaking, people like me will tell you it's actually a better movie than the first one. I mean, it's neither here nor there. Masterpiece versus masterpiece, right? But the directions that Godfather 2 goes, the way that Coppola very fiercely did not want to do, he didn't want to repeat the first movie. He wanted to try something, go in a different direction, and he succeeded. But what The Conversation does, it's Gene Hackman, the now unfortunately late, great, multiple Oscar winner Gene Hackman, as a wiretapper. And it's not predicting a future where there are cameras everywhere necessarily, but it's showing us where we were headed. that we were headed for an America, and you could say around the world, but we'll stick with it because the film is made in America, and it's set at a very particular time where you could no longer be in any public place and have confidence that someone wasn't recording your conversation. And before a certain point in time, there were public spaces where you could go and be 100% sure you weren't being recorded. And so Coppola doesn't necessarily tell us this is all bad, but he presents it as a bit of a Pandora's box. And unlike The Godfather, which has a lot to chew on other than just the plot beats and Sonny and all of the stuff with Michael, is he really a terrible guy or is he whatever? But there isn't that much as far as making proclamations, making sort of pronouncements. Here's where we are, and here's where I think we're going. And A Conversation does that. It's a fascinating film to study and to really kind of dig into. And what is this movie really about? Is it really about a wiretapper, or is it about a loss of privacy itself? And this is where the great films, if you have difficulty shutting your brain off, and you were kind of trained to do this in film school, as I was, to see what is the artist really saying, what is the art itself really saying. Dirty Harry, depending on if you see the film as about one honest cop who's not afraid to break the law or bend the law, but one honest cop trying to take down a serial killer, or is it a story of one honest cop versus a system that it tries to swallow him up, or is it a film about the system itself and a kind of rogue cop who needs to be, poof, go away. We understand what you're trying to do. We don't want you. Your methods are not needed. Your services are no longer required, Inspector Callahan. GTFOH. Coppola, and we've seen this recently. We saw this recently with Megalopolis. And Megalopolis, this is so ridiculous. Coppola's made, I don't even know how many movies in between when he first began teasing that project. He started talking about Megalopolis, I'm telling you, 30 years ago. My memory is that 30 years ago, Coppola first brought it up, and maybe he called it something else. So he did, for example, in 92, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm sorry, I don't think that movie is very good. I saw it in theaters. It was a packed crowd, and my sense was we were just scratching our head. Looks great. What unbelievable costume design, production design, the music. Anthony Hopkins, who really isn't known to be a scenery chewer, but he was really chewing scenery as, Van Helsing. Like, he was so over the top, that, it was like a James Woods, William Shatner level being over the top. I think because Hopkins was a little bored. He didn't really think that his character was very interesting. Well, we'd seen Van Helsing in how many movies even up to that point. But that was a film. It was a box office success. And, Coppola is somebody, has always been willing to take enormous risks, to roll the dice, to dare to be great, as if someone who had already accomplished as much as he had, even going to Apocalypse Now, for example, in 1979. He was not content to just make ordinary great films. He wanted to achieve a kind of transcendence. And I was not happy a number of years ago when, more so him, but when he and Scorsese were talking about the state of cinema, and they really kind of dragged comic book films. Now, there were people within the business, such as Jon Favreau, who said, and he was very clear, Francis Coppola can say whatever the fuck he wants about the state of cinema. His resume gives him the right, and there's no process where someone like me, meaning Favreau, is ever going to check him back. So Favreau was telling people, don't rip on him. Say that you disagree with him. I don't agree. But don't act like this guy is some doddering old man who doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't see cinema the way that other people do. And it's part of how a guy as successful as Coppola. Now, the joke was when he was a little boy, he wanted to have his own vineyard. So he got into the movie business and did so well and made so much money temporarily because he spent as much as he's made, but he was able to open the vineyard. Francis Coppola, there's a whole generation of people, they don't know that he was a filmmaker. They know that Coppola, that's the wines. George Foreman, who unfortunately also recently passed away. He was a boxer? What do you mean he was a boxer? You mean the guy with the grills? Well, how do you think he got into the grills? Well, I don't know. Do you think that he was just wearing boxing gloves and those infomercials just kind of put them on to see what the... Hey, now, now that you mention it, I always thought it was a little weird that he was wearing boxing gloves. Well, how does somebody... Greg Norman is probably... Oh, he was a golfer? Same kind of thing. But Coppola went through a lot of turmoil on a personal level in the 70s. And in the run-up to making Apocalypse Now, and this is a bit of a cliche, Scorsese fell victim to this as well. He began to abuse drugs and alcohol. Maybe I shouldn't use the word abuse. He was drinking and doing drugs to a level where, in his own words, he started to go a little cuckoo. And an incredible documentary called Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, which is about the protracted, brutal shoot of Apocalypse Now, which when it was conceived, Apocalypse Now was supposed to be, but when you have a filmmaker such as Coppola, the supposed to be doesn't always come to fruition, even if the film gets made exactly the way he wants it, which is more or less what happened. But Apocalypse Now, the intent of the powers that be in Hollywood, the studio, and Coppola had the company American Zoetrope. He was another one who took control of his career pretty early, as I've talked about with Clint Eastwood, that he formed Malpaso Productions and had had his own shingle on a Warner Brothers lot and made movies through Warner's Juror Number 2 is a Malpaso production. You're talking about more than 50 years worth of movies. But Coppola's Apocalypse Now, the idea, because we'd only gotten out of Vietnam about 4 or 5 years prior, where the embassy was overrun. I mean, what a fucking disaster, right? But Apocalypse Now was supposed to be the first large-scale film about Vietnam. I'll put it in quotes, because it wasn't specifically supposed to be about the Vietnam War. But we just said Vietnam because it wasn't technically a war, right? Congress, did they ever authorize it? I don't think they did. That's why they used to call it the Vietnam conflict. And sometimes you might even still hear, say, why would they use that word there? We can call it a war, but technically it was the Vietnam conflict. They don't know that, or maybe Congress declared war later, but they sure as hell didn't declare war at a time that under other circumstances they did. It was supposed to be the first major Hollywood production to deal with this terrible, tragic run-up of events. But what ended up happening was Coppola had so many problems getting the film together. He had Harvey Keitel was supposed to play the Martin Sheen character. It was Keitel. And Keitel, I think, got fired. I don't think that Keitel was, I don't think that he got sick. He was canned, or maybe the studio didn't like it and they were looking at the rush. See, Harvey Keitel is such a distinctive actor. There are certain roles that you look at and say, why did they cast him? Speaking of Stanley Kubrick, that apocryphal story, which I won't get into here, where how Keitel claims he got fired because he mouthed off to Kubrick. I think he got fired more or less by Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, and Kubrick went along with it because of some wackiness that took place on the set. But Keitel was the wrong actor for that role in Eyes Wide Shut. And I'm not glad that if Harvey went through a terrible time, but I don't think that he was the right actor to play the role that ended up going to Martin Sheen. And I was going to say Kurtz, but Colonel Kurtz is, that was the Brando part. But Martin Sheen had a heart attack early in filming, and they were out in the jungle. Coppola's out in the jungle, and it's taking forever because he didn't envision a normal Vietnam combat type film, or even a Full Metal Jacket like a Kubrick, where there's some combat, but it's not strictly speaking a combat film. It's more of what you would call a war atmosphere film. So with all of the production delays, Apocalypse Now was supposed to come out at the end of 1978 to qualify for the Oscars of that year. But in an incredible, true Hollywood twist that is so absurd that nobody believed it at the time, it's still hard to believe, Michael Cimino, like in the cloak of darkness and secrecy, he somehow brought The Deer Hunter in way under budget and way ahead of schedule. Enough so, they were able to get the film ready, and it opened in 2 theaters, one in New York, one in Los Angeles. And I believe it was Christmas of 1978, and Apocalypse Now wasn't ready. So The Deer Hunter opened, it was wrapped, ready, De Niro, who obviously had already won an Oscar for supporting actor with Coppola in Godfather Part 2. And there are people to this day that'll say, Travis Bickle aside, De Niro as the young Don Corleone, that's the best work that Bobby D ever did. He is magnetic. He certainly is better, quote unquote, than his BFF Pacino. I mean, but that's neither here nor there. But nobody ever has said anything other than what a fucking masterclass of film acting. And De Niro was he even 30 at the time? I don't even think that he was 30 when he shot his scenes for Godfather 2. So Coppola finally got Apocalypse Now done, and people were going crazy on the set. Dennis Hopper was high as a kite. To watch the movie, just watch the scenes with Dennis Hopper. I didn't even know how his eyes were open. How did he not need hospitalization? He talked about it with James Lipton in the 90s when he had that big comeback, movies like Speed and Waterworld. He was bombed out of his mind, no pun intended, the entire shoot. I don't think he was sober for a single scene, but that's Dennis Hopper for you. So when Apocalypse Now finally made it out, when it hit theaters, it didn't have the impression that it otherwise would have, even though it's not even close to The Deer Hunter. The Deer Hunter's not really a Vietnam movie. It uses the Vietnam War to tell a part of a story, a really kind of sad and somewhat tragic story about a bunch of miners who live in this Pennsylvania steel town. It's a really sad, I think a much more depressing and somber movie than Apocalypse Now, which is kind of psychedelic and a little bit batshit when you get into it. But Coppola was giving it everything that he had. He didn't just want to make any old, it was kind of a loose adaptation. The reason why the documentary was called Hearts of Darkness is he was telling Joseph Campbell's Hearts of Darkness in the form of a Vietnam story. Like that title wasn't an accident of Hearts of Darkness. And I think the film is brilliant, but it's a difficult watch. It's going in a lot of different directions at the same time, and I don't really know. I don't really understand. Brando was a problem because he showed up very, very overweight from where he was contracted to kind of be, and you hate to even bring that up, but his character was supposed to be more important, not just from a kind of symbolic perspective. He was supposed to have more to do, and Coppola couldn't figure out what he was supposed to do. We were going to just shoot around this guy? What are we going to do? So they changed it. It didn't quite make the movie that he wanted to, but it was not going to win all the awards anyway, because you're not going to have back-to-back Vietnam War films winning the Oscar. And The Deer Hunter just cleaned up. Now, historically, I think Apocalypse Now is way better remembered by history than The Deer Hunter, which, I mean, I think it's incredibly powerful, but it's somewhat overrated. I don't think it should have won all of those Oscars. Now, I also believe that Full Metal Jacket is a better film than Platoon, which also won the hardware. I'm a big Oliver Stone fan, but I don't love Platoon, and I think Full Metal Jacket is in top 3 best Kubrick films. But Coppola would mix the personal with the kind of splashy studio features. And he never really, to my knowledge, complained about the fact that you can't do everything you want every time out of the box. But he did a movie called One from the Heart, and he did The Cotton Club, and neither of those films were successful. And One from the Heart cost Coppola a significant portion of his net worth, from what I've read and what he's kind of talked about in various interviews. He's a great interview. And I should also point out, he's fantastic on social media. He doesn't look like a guy who would have fully embraced Instagram. But he's had Instagram lives with fans where he takes questions and on video. Like, I mean, I love that stuff, but he doesn't seem like somebody who would do that, but he does it. He really appears to enjoy interacting with fans and doesn't come across as holier than thou or, well, I'm better than these people. He really loves to engage with, people 50, 60, even 70 years younger than him. And I like that. I respect that. But he made Peggy Sue Got Married in 86. And that was something that he did, presumably, so that he would go bankrupt, so that he could, I think the vineyard was already going, but so that he could keep it going. Sometimes you just have to do something that wouldn't be your number one priority type of project. I love that movie. It came out the year after Back to the Future. There are a lot of parallels, although Back to the Future, they really do go back in time, spoiler alert. And in Peggy Sue Got Married, it has the form of a time travel story, but I don't actually think that it's a time travel story. I think it's a dream within a dream, fever dream story. But that's a film that it's so well shot and well made and well acted, although Nicolas Cage, who is Coppola's uncle, by the way, Nicolas Coppola would be his real name. He's Nicolas Cage's uncle. I don't think I said that right. Cage took a lot of flack for his very broad performance, but Kathleen Turner is fantastic. A young Jim Carrey, not surprisingly, steals every scene that he's in. And another future multiple Oscar nominee who probably should have won at least one, Joan Allen, makes an impression in a kind of smallish role. But I love Peggy Sue Got Married. You look at Coppola's later work, and it's kind of unfortunate. He did Gardens of Stone the year after Peggy Sue Got Married. That's a Vietnam War movie, but more of a war at home kind of story. Big cast, James Caan, James Earl Jones, and D.B. Sweeney, he had a pretty decent sized role in Megalopolis. Coppola always loved D.B. Sweeney. You know, he kind of was maybe a notch below the Kiefer Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, Emilio Estevez of that era. But D.B. Sweeney headlined a bunch of films, and I always thought he was a really solid film actor in his own right. But it's difficult because Coppola had to work within the confines of the system, and not everybody is cut out to do that. Nobody wants to be given notes. You're already an Oscar winner. You're an iconic filmmaker and legend. You don't want to get notes from some 24-year-old creative exec, but unfortunately, that's part of the business. And I just don't like Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think it's lousy. And I remember at NYU, the professor, David Legowski, we didn't screen it, but he thought the film was fantastic. He said, no, I have it in Coppola's top tier, maybe a notch below Godfather. I'm like, bro, no offense. I don't know what movie you saw. The one I saw was really nice to look at, but I mean, what, don't you think Keanu was a little bit miscast as Harker? I mean, wasn't that was almost like stunt casting, I thought. But yeah, what are you going to do? That's what makes a horse race. I didn't agree with him on that movie. And the film with Robin Williams, Jack, also an incredible cast. Not good. And not just because, oh my God, Bill Cosby has a pretty big role. It was lousy then in 96. Film just doesn't work. It's a good idea for a movie, but it never ignites. Now, for me, the last great film that Coppola made was The Rainmaker. That's unfortunately 28 years ago. The Rainmaker is a virtual masterpiece. I give it 9 or 9.5 out of 10. It is so good. And I recently discussed in particular Matt Damon's kind of undersold, fantastic performance in the lead as Rudy Baylor. And, you know, Jon Voight in that era just chewing it up, just chewing scenery like nobody's business. Again, he's doing James Woods and William Shatner kind of stuff where every line reading, he is maximizing his contribution, where it's nonstop hamming it up, but super entertaining with the way he does it. I love The Rainmaker. That was a box office hit, which got mostly rave reviews from critics. It didn't get the awards consideration that I think that it really should have. It was so well done. And it's kind of embarrassing that all the way back then, when Coppola was, 56? And you had critics saying, yeah, Coppola still has it. Hey, fuck you. What do you mean he still has it? 56 is not that old. Go fuck yourself. I mean, I don't think he said that, but that's what I would be saying. I mean, give me a break. It's not like when Martin Scorsese did Killers of the Flower Moon, people saying, wow, amazing how sharp Scorsese. That's a little different. He's 80, 81 years old. But to act like somebody 56 could be past it? I mean, give me a break. But that's the way that it goes. And the failure of Megalopolis means that Coppola, yeah, the guy has money. He's not really broke, but he can't fund his own film. He was talking about it, and he didn't do a GoFundMe, but he's talked a lot about, he has a script that people are saying is great. It might be something that he had worked on or has been working on for a while, but he doesn't just now have $15 million to put towards this film. So he's looking for financing, and man, Megalopolis cost the backers a shit ton of money. I think that movie cost 150, 200 million. Did it even make 50 million worldwide? Because I don't even know if it made 15 million here in the States. Nobody wanted to see it. The reviews were lousy. I didn't know anybody who went to see it when it was kind of briefly in theaters, but everybody said the same thing. Francis went for broke. He dared to try to be great. He didn't just want to make a decent movie. He wanted to do something earth-shattering and earth-shaking. It seemed to be a swing and a miss. I personally have not seen it. If any of you out there have and you want to offer your comments, go right ahead. And really, in Coppola's filmography, what do you consider his top 3, his top 5? What's the weakest film of his that you've seen? Because for me, I think Bram Stoker's Dracula, I mean, I even prefer Jack. Jack is, it's entertaining. I've seen it 3 times. It's a 2-star movie, but it's a fun 2-star movie because the performances are very entertaining. I mean, Jennifer Lopez plays a school teacher. I think she's actually really good. She's one of the, maybe the best things about the film. But I could talk about Coppola for hours. This is another one of those episodes where almost wish there was a round table, like a dinner, was a dinner for 5? The show that Jon Favreau used to host on, I think it was on IFC. Their old episodes are on the Sundance Channel now, I believe. But something like that where you just have a topic and a bunch of people who love film. They don't necessarily have to be filmmakers. Could be critics. Could be, the Roger Eberts of the day. But there's just too much on Francis Coppola for one episode, where I missed about 90% of what makes this guy so special and why his filmography is so galvanizing, and why he, despite the fact and the failure of so many of his films, why he is revered. This is a top tier legend. This is not a guy on the 2nd or 3rd tier. Coppola's on the top tier with Wells, with Kubrick, with Hitchcock. He doesn't come up short or come up shy. He is there. That's the kind of writer, director, visionary, groundbreaking, pioneering, envelope pushing individual Francis Coppola is. And I hope that he's able to get another film funded. You wouldn't want to go out with a lousy movie. It's something that always bothered. Tarantino's talked about this with Hitchcock. He felt that Hitchcock still had the technical skills in the last 10, 15 years of his career. He didn't pick the best scripts. And unfortunately, sometimes it just be like that. But I hope today is a happy 86th birthday. Maybe he'd get some good news on his new project. To Francis Ford Coppola, Oscar winner, icon, and a really pivotal figure in the continued development of independent film. The fact that he was able to make such personal films under the imprimatur of the studio banner and the studio system. There's a lot to be said for that. Those 70s filmmakers, the Arthur Penns and Altman and Scorsese and Kubrick and Lucas, that they were able to make these distinctive, in some cases, really microscope on Americana films. And Francis Ford Coppola, one of the greats. Happy 86th birthday. This has been episode 485 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of this rainy, miserable Monday afternoon here with me in New York. But if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.